Um, you aren't already watching in gallery view, I strongly suggest doing that just because it is the most fun way to actually participate because as you're going to hear, storytelling is a participatory sport. It is not, I don't even understand the word audience when I do storytelling. I understand the word participants, and that's usually how I actually refer to that language. So I had to pin myself for the point of recording, but for all of you, it's really beautiful to get to watch and be part of it together. So let's just start for a moment and close our eyes. And as you close your eyes, I'm going to invite you to attune to some place in your body where your personal superpowers live. And you're like, whoa, I don't even know how to think about that. And this is not a thinking game. This is actually just connecting to your sensory intuitiveness. So for some strange reason, my hands are going on my knees. And so whatever your first instinct, your first intuition is, just allow your hands to go to that place in your body. And so we're already coming into this place of listening because as storytellers, that's our first place of existence. It's in the deep listening. Because as storytellers, we're deliverers, we're reporters, we're the givers. We have to have something to give first. And that is what emerges out of the deep listening. So I'm inviting you to listen to where is your superpower live in your body today, in this moment? And what is its strength? What is this superpower that you have inside of you that you may use in your everyday life or you may not? You might want to even ask for it to reveal itself to you in a symbol. And some of you might see an image right away and it might not make any sense. If that's the case, you are right on the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. Because I always say the less you know, the better off you are in this particular situation. It means you are truly surrendered into that deep listening and that space of receiving. And for some of you, this might feel very uncomfortable because you don't see, but you sense. And so it's not about how I do it, but it's really about discovering your way of connecting with your deep intuition. And so as you breathe into this superpower, as if you could expand your breath and breathe into that superpower and breathe out so that you fill all the space around you and outside of you with that gift as well. I invite you to connect with your heart, really connect to your intention. What are you in service to in this lifetime? If you could give your life to something, what would it be? Would it be love? Would it be unity? Would it be healing? Restoration? Kindness? What is that thing that you are so committed to? And breathing that in and feeling that expand through your body, down to the bottom of your feet, to the top of your head. So your whole body knows that. And then exhaling it out. So now it lives outside of you and around you. And so now you feel this bubble within and without of your superpowers within and the generosity of sharing them. And you have clarity of what you're in service to and the generosity of sharing that. And so our class on storytelling is complete. That's what we're doing. That is what we're doing. It's really that simple. But let's kind of deconstruct it now and really go into the mechanics of it. I love that, usually when people come for, they say, when they say they're coming for writing, I want to be really clear because I don't teach writing classes. I teach storytelling classes. But what I'll tell you is that everything I know about storytelling as a mystic practice, as a doorway to the mysteries of the universe, I learned while writing a novel. So I can't say I don't teach writing. It is an access point. And what I want to do today is give you guys a very different webinar than I normally teach. And it's really some of the original thinking of how I understand what the true role the storyteller is. So this will apply to your writing of novels. This will apply to working with people in trauma. This will even apply to, gosh, so many of the things that people spoke to here, painting, and drawing, and it's really thinking about how do you stand in this archetype of storyteller. And so we're going to talk about that. So let's. I love just beginning with a bit of history around language. The Hawaiians say that words are so powerful that they can speed up the world or slow it down.
Mm.
Think about that, about the power of pausing when you tell your stories, and how what a gift it can be to allow people to receive what you just said and let it integrate in before rushing off to the next thing. I'm one of those people that talks a lot, talks fast too, so it's always good for me to remember that. The Maoris say that the words don't describe a thing, they are the thing. The Sicilians say that words poke holes in a universe. I always think about that when my temper starts rising. And I'm like, okay, if I can just breathe through this and not say anything that I don't really mean because I can't ever take it back. There's a term in physics that speaks to that once something has happened, when a word has spoken in this place, it never leaves. It stays there forever. Sometimes I think about that when I go to really ugly truck stops when I'm driving across the country. Ugly to me, it's all in the eye of the beholder. And I'm like, if I just sing a really beautiful tune while I'm walking through here, that will live here too. In Japan, there's a word called kotodama, and it refers to the spirit of a word before it's even been spoken out loud. And all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I want to say that again because this to me is possibly one of the greatest keys, one of the greatest old wisdom keepings that helps us understand our place on this planet as humans. And perhaps one of the things that's almost being erased out of our memory in terms of understanding the 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 beauty, the power, the humanity in our humanness. That the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. It really speaks to our unique role on the planet. Now, you can think of this as from a very human perspective, which means that we're the ones doing it, right? But if we can go into an animistic perspective, we would be like, oh, well, the birds are doing that too, and so are the whales, and so are the trees. If we could only understand all their languages, perhaps we would know what they're singing into existence. Or you could just wonder, perhaps it is our job to listen so deeply into them, because we are, after all, the ones who can influence matter by taking a thought from the imagination. This imagination is like the completely unexplored new frontier, right? There's we have no idea where imagination comes from. I love it. We don't even, it's like, yeah. And so we can take something from the unseen world, we can filter it through the vibration of our heart, we can bring it into being through our voice, we can convince someone else that this idea can then take shape. Like I think of the first people that invented the airplane, how many people must have thought they were insane? And yet they did it. They then formed matter out of an idea. Humans can do that. So it's so powerful. We're so powerful. It's such a responsibility how to use these words. So let's kind of get into a real basic piece around what is a story? What is it? I'm going to ask everybody. This is a collective inquiry. What is a story? There's no wrong answer. Yes, Sibel?
Uh, and I think story for me as a mentor. And for a mentor, for instance, when I was a child, the Wizard of Oz story, my mentor, I discovered it.
Are you, I'm just want to make sure I understand you, in your accent. Is it mentor
Yes,
in English?
mentor.
Yeah, so like a teacher. Yeah.
Yes.
So stories are our teachers, and they're where we teach our values and our belief systems, what we believe is possible. Absolutely. I love they are our teachers. And some of the first stories, the origin stories or creation stories, those stories, I love this that Sean Kane says that those original myths were the earth speaking out loud. And they were the instructional manuals for how to understand Earth and how it worked and our place in it. And at those times, those stories were considered true. That's such a weird word. I don't like the word true. But if you want to get play, we'll play with it because true is actually a carpentry term, and it means from A to Z. It means it's a point of perspective. What I can see from here to there is true. So now those stories are so far behind us that they're considered fiction. It really takes the whole idea of what's fact and fiction and flips it all over into all different kinds of places. But don't let me digress. Who else? What's a story? What is it? It's a relationship, says Brooke. Tell us more about that. Um, it's a journey in a container. Gosh, I love that. It is a container. I'm going to talk a lot about what lives inside stories. And right, it does something. If you're telling a story, it's going to take you somewhere. Now look, I have a dear friend, and every day at the end of the day, he does a list. He tells me a list of all the things that happened that day. So I let that sit there. And if he asks me how my day went, I will tell him, I can't help it because I'm a storyteller. I'm going to tell him a story about something that happened. But my stories are a journey. So I'm not going to get to the end right away. I'm just going to be like, well, this happened, and then that brought me to here, and that brought me to here. And because he's such a fact and information person, he interrupts me every state of the way. And I'm like, if you could just listen, I'll tell you the story, and we're going to go somewhere, and then you're going to get the answer at the end. This world isn't really meant for storytellers because we are living in the era of fact and information where so many of us have been entrained where we're fact checking all along the way. So, yes, stories are journeys and they're going to take you somewhere. And one of my favorite quotes is, there's more truth in fiction. So you can say a lot without having to get caught in that fray right now, which is quite a big one. Barbara's saying that stories have an offering, right? And they're sharing. Barbara, you just touched on something that's so big in my world, and I'm so grateful that you just said it because it's this point um, of making an offering that some of us we really are we're making offerings. And when we come to the place of storyteller, then we have something to give, which is very different than I need to be seen. I need to be witnessed, and I need that. Now that is a like in the work that I see Vanessa, um, nodding. There are times, especially in moments of trauma, that is number one. That is the number one place. I need to be seen. I need to be witnessed. I need to be heard. I need to not be questioned. I just need to share what happened. And when I teach, I have a storytelling modality where I work with trauma. That's step one. I get to tell this story in this way for the very last time. And there's no questioning it. There's just, I'm saying, please witness me. That's a specific kind of storytelling. And it's a specific kind of initiation, too. And it's a specific kind of ask. And there are times in all of our lives when we need that. So may we know that we can come to our closest people and we say, I have to tell you my story. I'm going to ask you to hold it. I'm going to ask you not to interrupt me or ask or question it. I just have to tell somebody this. This needs to be heard. Now that is what I put into the category of working with story as a healing modality. When we come to the story, come to the place of as a sacred storyteller, the giveaway, which is where Barbara was bringing us to, then now we're in that place of generosity. Now we're in, I have a gift to give away. I have a gift to give to you. And our energy is completely on the audience participants. Like I said, it just one of those. You're completely attuned to. It's like when you give a gift at birthdays or holidays. When you give that gift, you're watching them open it because you're like, oh my God, how are they going to do the ribbon? Can you open it a little bit faster? So it's like that is the energy. It's very different, very very different. And to me, that's a sign of like a more masterful storyteller. Ed is saying that stories are living entities and they create more life. I love that. I so am with you, and like that's how I understand stories. Look, there's I think every religion agrees that this body that comes from this earth has a soul inside of it, right? And like I think we're in agreement that there's souls that live in this body. And so this is our body as a vehicle for soul. I think of story as a vehicle for spirit, and the spirit of love, the spirit of joy, the spirit of grace, the spirit of hate, the spirit of disruption, the spirit of conflict. Those can come through stories, and they can live through us as we tell them. So I always, always say, like when you're talking story around the dinner table, who are you inviting to join with you? Are you inviting the story of connection to come as you talk your story about the state of the world, the spirit of wonder, or are you working with a story of disruption or disconnection? Um, and then I just want to speak to, right, I love that, a feast and a banquet. Spirit song. Spirit is our story, says Linda. Yeah. And Florence is saying that it connect space and time. That is a beautiful thing. Did any of you guys seen Everything Happening at Once? That movie? I don't know if I'm saying it perfectly right. Yeah. It's a great movie to see. It was such interesting storytelling and about time and space and story. So when we're looking at a sacred story, we're looking at a story that has a spirit inside of it. And we're looking at as sacred storytellers, we're saying that, yes, I'm willing to walk with a living being and collaborate with this living being and bring it into the room to be with us. And so, as I understand sacred storytelling, I'm working on a big storytelling ceremony in a couple of months, and I was talking to musicians, and I was like, look, this is here I think about it. Story, there's story, which is the star of the show. There's me that's in service of the story. And there's the musicians who are in service to the storyteller. They're telling a story. And I literally think of it in that order. Story is first. And so what is it to be a deliverer of story and have it not be you that's being seen, but the story itself? This is too much to think about. Let's play with some more things in terms of practicality. So one of the things that I don't do is I will never give you the 6 bullet points for how to tell a story. And the reason is I think that is very, very, very dangerous business being done not necessarily in an intentionally in a way that's intended to cause harm, but I actually think it does, and I'll tell you why. Because people have understood the technology of story and how it relates to humans and how it affects our belief systems, our values, and what we believe is possible. And when they understand the basic construct of a story, that it's going to take you on a journey, then they understand how to use it against you. And these stories don't have a spirit inside of them. They're not these living beings. I call these clone stories. I can recognize a clone story because I can't remember it. They're often used in marketing. It doesn't stay with me. It's got no soul. It's got no spirit. There's another kind of story that I feel like is lurking around. I call these zombie stories. And these stories feast upon fear. And so they plant fear. And they plant disconnection. And so in times of this time, like how do we understand what's real? And then you've all found your different news sources, right? And it's like, and one of the ways that I like to look at it is just through a story, just through the lens of a sacred storyteller. And I feel like in so many ways, the sacred storyteller gets the key to liberation out of there being a right and wrong. I know that's going to really trigger some people, but it means that stories are whole. And there's a lot of different realities that can live with them. And a lot of us are living with half stories. So when it's a sacred storyteller, if you can look at this, you can be like, okay, well, this is a story construct. This is a vehicle. And you might have 2 tires, but not the steering wheel. Or that story is actually planting fear. Is that story a trustworthy story if it's planting fear? Who wrote that story? What were they in service to? And um, and what are they getting back for it? These are very simple questions in our complex media time to be able to ask. Is this story about bringing us together, which is about what is a sacred story? It's in honor of life. Is this story in honor of life? Or is this story disrupting life? So I want to talk a little bit about something that I haven't talked a lot about, which is, I think, one of maybe the very first webinars that I ever did. So it feels like going home, getting to come back to this piece. And it's really about looking at how to treat a story, a sacred story, this wild being who might have come knocking at your door, or maybe it was living inside of you. And how do we come into relationship so we can give it out to the world? So the first piece I always speak to is treat your story with respect. You know, it's like you want to go on a date with somebody, right? You want to meet someone wonderful, or you want to get married, or you want to just a good dance partner, and you want someone that you respect, right? And so that means that if you and I think of something like when I first got to know sacred stories, I really think of them as a wild horse. And a wild horse will not let you ride it unless you respect it. Because you want the story to come to you. You want it to inspire you. You want it to feed you and nourish you. So you might put out an altar for it. There's very physical things that you can do. You might put flowers out for it. You know, I'm visiting Richmond, Virginia, where my parents live, and I left here many, many years ago because I for a lot of reasons, but one of the big things here is that there's an intense amount of racism, and I didn't want to spend my life in a place that had that much racism. I could only see what wasn't working. I come back now, it's many years later. Of course, there's the Mark Twain quote, you know, when I was 14, my parents were such idiots. And when I was 21, I was so impressed by how much smarter they'd become. And I'm walking around this town, and all the trees have like fairy doors and offering to the fairies here. There is so much magic in this place, and this honoring of the forest deities, and it's everywhere. And so there's so many ways that we can begin to engage with the unseen world. I want to make one note of caution about when we really start coming into relationship with the spirit of a story. Because the spirit of that story, if truly invited in, will inevitably live in your life and through you and show up. So that means, and I've learned this the hard way, that's why I really want to give this as a warning. If you're going to take on an old story, there's going to be a lot of energy with it. So when I took on the story of Medea, well, of course, betrayal showed up in my life. It was one of the core aspects of that story. And what would ripen me and prepare me to talk story from the truest place, but then to understand betrayal deeply from the inside out. I always think that, like, as when you're a writer and storyteller, everything that happens in life is just material for your work. It's great. It's a weird aspect of being an artist and creative, and what it is that you have an immediate place to channel everything that you're dealing with, and it's something that I just so invite you to do. So, um, when I say treat your story with respect, it is like how to humble yourself enough to understand that while you have a very smart and beautiful brain and a really great, strong ego because you know that your voice is worthy of being listened to and heard, then there's this humbleness that also needs to be present. How humble can I be to listen to a thought I've never had before? One of the reasons why I love being a storyteller is because there are so many times that I get exposed to things and to ideas and to wisdom keepings that I never would have come on to, perhaps. And they arrive, and I'm like, wow, that's so cool. And it's really true through listening for the story and what it wants to communicate through you. Another number two is embody your story. You know, and what this means is that there's a lot of different ways that people can talk story. And one school of thought is that you get very, very detailed and you describe everything. I went into the white room. It had a bed that was 2 feet away from the room, from the wall. And that is one style of storytelling. Um, and to me, that's sort of like it's like creating a coloring book. that people then color inside of in their imagination. You could also say, once upon a time, at the very bottom of the ocean, there was this extraordinary tree. And beside that extraordinary tree was the most beautiful woman in the world. How many of you saw yourself in that scene? Okay. How many of you saw an extraordinary tree? Maybe you guys can write in the chat box what you saw as that extraordinary tree. And perhaps you can also write for us what the most beautiful woman in the world looked like. Well, what I want to speak to in this is that this is another kind of storytelling, and it's really about the storyteller. For we all have our different medicine and techniques. So this is just my technique. So I'm not saying it's the only one. And it's your job to figure out what one works for you. To me, that other style puts me in my head. I'm looking at the whole thing the whole time, and I'm describing it for you. There's another way of embodying your story and placing yourself right in the center of it, and then letting it emit itself through you. So you transform and transport the people with you. Different styles of storytelling. The Tree of Life. I don't even know how to pronounce that, Chuka, but I'm assuming that's a tree that lives in a place that I don't. um, Savella says she has a talisman hair with stars. Ah, I love that as the most beautiful woman in the world. So look, there's something also that I did very specifically that I wanted to point out. At the time that I grew up in the media that was speaking to me, and the world that I lived in, beauty was represented by, as for women, as being a certain size, having blonde hair, having blue eyes. And that's what beauty was shown to me. So, wow, where do I belong in that world? And and so as storytellers, we have this extraordinary opportunity to create space in people's own imagination for what is beauty. I don't have to define it. I can create a space for different kinds of beauty to live among us. So that's an incredible PowerPoint that I just want a new version of PowerPoint, a point of power that I offer you. Um, the third point about how to ride a wild horse is master the art of giving. We talked a little bit about this, but if you're in a group of 12 or you're in a group of 2,000, it is really about connecting with your audience. And once you've connected with your audience, that is 98% of your work. And I often think of storytelling as gardening. I'm planting seeds, planting seeds, planting seeds. And stories are magic, right? I mean, we have a story that's 4,000 years that's still walking among us. And your stories that you tell, if they have enough life in them, and if you tell them to people who can catch them, they might way outlive you. I mean, I'm carrying someone's grandmother's story, and I don't even know her or her grandmother's name, but I still carry her story because it was that powerful. So, I had the opportunity of working with Betty Buckley. I don't know if you know her. She was the woman who sang "Memories" from in the Broadway musical Cats. She was amazing, and I got to mentor underneath her while she was at Williamstown Theater Festival. And I remember her talking about, and she'd gone through a real dark night of the soul, had lost everything, and was in her coming back. And she talked about how when she sang to every single person in the audience. And I remember sitting in the audience, and it was like being in front of the Mona Lisa. I thought she was looking at me the whole time. And this is someone whose spiritual practice, like, she knew the power of the gift that she was giving, and she was shameless in her expression of offering it. And the sense of command of attention was so there. So part of this piece around master the art of giving is knowing and embodying so wholly what your gift that you're giving is. Which comes to the next point in a very strange way, which is one of your biggest jobs is to kill the narcissist. We have a lot of people in a lot of other countries. I don't know what it's like over there, but I can tell you, in the United States, we have another virus. It's a hidden secret virus that they're not writing about, and it's the virus of narcissism. It is really intense. I live in LA, so it might be a little bit more intense there, but it is a thing. And your job as a storyteller, as a sacred storyteller, is to know in your giveaway that your story isn't about you. It's about the listener. It's about the person who's catching the story, the garden where your seed is landing. That is what your story is about. This is the connection that you are creating of giving and receiving, which is this unit of the cycle of giving and receiving. It's one of the oldest cycle that keeps life going on this planet. And it's the one that's been the biggest disrupted in so many different ways. So I really believe in the strangest of ways that when sacred storytellers are in the full command of being part of that cycle, of the giving and receiving cycle, then something happens and we're restoring some kind of order on the planet through this simple act of truly giving and creating a space where people can truly receive. And it's really kind of amazing because as you start telling a story and you put your focus on someone else and you give them this gift, everyone of all ages kind of melts, like they instantly become 5 years old. And it's such a point of sweetness. And then at the end, they give something back. They give you their gratitude. They give a clap. They give a snap. They give something back. But they're giving back the entire time because their energy is infusing your story. It's the greatest mystery that I can't even tell you, but the listeners actually call out the story. So one of the tricks that I do, I don't like to call it a trick, it deserves a better term. But before every story that I come into, I start with a storyteller's prayer. And I'll tell you that prayer, but it's not, and if it inspires you, you can carry it. But it's really about listening for what is your prayer, what is your way of calling in the spirit of that story. So the way I start every story is often I'll work with song. And what's the song doing? It's clearing the resonance. It's clearing the space, the energy between us. And it's creating a clean palette for us to be with. We're preparing the garden to catch the seed. I make a prayer. This is a prayer is may all the words that need to be heard be spoken. May all the words that need to be heard be spoken. That is where the tender place is in the hearts of your listeners. That what they most need spoken to, maybe they're carrying broken hearts, or there's a disconnection between them and someone that they love, or there's a lot of conflict, or they just lost their job and they just need a little bit of tenderness. That may what comes through you speak to that aspect in them that needs to be tended to. I'll tell you one other thing before I go on, which is that in Welsh, there's a word it's like 7 syllables, and if I say it, it's just going to sound all wrong, so I'm not going to blasphemize that word. But it refers to a storyteller as a guide between the dimensions. And I understood that storytellers were healers. And that you have this great capacity to do that with how you're holding your intention, how you're holding that audience, and how you're carrying that story. You have this capacity to create this extraordinary field. And so I start with that simple prayer. May all the words that need to be heard be spoken, and may all the words that need to be spoken be heard. I'm also praying for the Muse, that whatever needs to be said and is being offered to be spoken through this vehicle, through this tool of life, that may they land in a place where they can be heard. Maybe the trees have something to say today, or the ocean, or the deities of that land, or the ancestors. I've seen wild things happen in stories. I'll carry stories that I've told a million times, and then they'll come out very differently in front of this one group. And it's not because I'm being a lazy storyteller. It's because something very specific is coming alive in their presence. And I always say that's when you're trusting the spirit of your story. So I always say listen for your story. This is number 5. Listen for your story, not just to your story. And it's like what that means is like you're being a good partner. And so you're letting the soul of your story evolve. And so even though this story has stood the test of time and it lingers, it might be ready to shift and transform. So when I worked with, I had someone ask me one time to bring them the story of Sleeping Beauty, and I said yes. And then I started working on it, and I started crying. I started sobbing. I was like, I don't work with old stories, and I was like, Leah, you're gonna have to get it together. I'm like, but I don't work with old stories, and I'm like, well then, Leah, you got to find the spirit of the story and learn how to tell it in the way that you tell stories. And so I went back to the bones of that story, and I told that story. I was like, show me your bones, so that I can understand how to be in respect for you, of you. And so when we go to these old stories, it's just like an elder. Some of these stories don't, I'm sorry, they don't deserve to be told in our time. They don't deserve to be repeated. They're carrying old damaging like frequencies that just disrupt. So it's like, so we want to be understand how powerful we are to bring them alive in the presence. But when we looked at that story, it's like, so when we're looking at an elder, we don't go to an elder and be like, ah, that jacket's awful, and just rip it off. They'd punch you in the nose. Right? So the same thing, if you're approaching an elder story and you're saying, it's time for a haircut. You've got so much wisdom in you, but maybe you need to, like, put on some new makeup, dye your hair. I don't know. Like, what do you want to do so that you can live among us and, like, people can listen to you? And so, but in order to do that and be truly respectful and be in the spirit of that story, you have got to understand the spirit, the bones of the story. And so when I went to Sleeping Beauty and really listened for the bones, and the way that I understand how to find the bones of a story is you go and you find as many different versions of it in different cultures. Because a lot of these stories have already been hijacked. So many of these stories, these old stories, came from pagan origins, and through different religious colonization, they were rewritten, reclaimed, all kinds of things. So we're already dealing with broken stories. And so you have to kind of come back and whisper to them and like say, hey, tell me your true self. Tell me who you truly are. So again, it's that kind of humble listening. I was once talking to the writer of the King's Speech. He said, oh yeah, I'm just a time traveler. I'm like, a time traveler? He's like, yeah, I had to go back in time to get that story. And sometimes I think, I'm just a reporter. I just like hang out with the ocean and then say what I hear. I'm just reporting in from the ocean. So it's like when we come back to these old stories and we start saying, okay, tell me your bones, and you listen to them from all across the country, all around the world, you're going to see the similarities. And Sleeping Beauty has a certain brilliance in it, and it has a very, very valuable aspect to our times. And at the core of that story, there's a very key warning. And it speaks to that when offered a gift, don't banish anybody from the table of communion. If you remember, they didn't, the king and the queen, they wanted to have a baby. They were granted their wish, but they didn't invite the fairies to the communion. They didn't invite them to the party. And oh, you don't want to scorn a woman. We know that, right? And the great cast was, great curse was cast. Well, look at what we're doing right now. Look at the divisiveness that's happening. How it's somehow become righteous to say, I will not have you in my Facebook page because you don't say something I agree with or I want to hear. How that's become normalized. And one of the stories, it warns that if we can't figure out how to invite everyone to the table of communion, then there'll be a curse cast on everyone. I'm not making this up. This is just an old story. It's what it has to say. So it's worthy of listening to these stories. Now, do you need to repeat that it's only the prince that will wake her up? Whoa, it's one of my favorite stories. I'm actually going to be doing a story ceremony with it at the end of the year. So I can't go any deeper into that one right now. I'll get carried away, obviously, because it really is a profound, profound story to work with. So number 6, we set the stage. And I always say, you want to create that Toto we aren't in Kansas anymore moment. I told you a little bit about, I don't drum. All the storytellers that I watched, they were drumming. I was like, I'm not going to become some white girl that takes up drumming just because I want to call a story. Like, that's just not honest or right. And I heard, yeah, but you sing. And I was like, oh, right, I do. And so now I sing. And so I invite you to really listen to what they're doing in the practice is they're invoking the spirit of the story. They're saying, please come, come, come. And so what is the way that you will invite the spirit of that story? I've seen, Stephen Jenkinson just make a basic plea. That's what he does. Before he does it, he pleads to the story to come and be with us. So it's not about, you can take inspiration from watching lots of people. I watch Martin Shaw, bam, he bangs on that drum. Michael Mead, they bang on that drum and poof, the story, the spirit of the story is with them. But you have your way. And so listen for that. Try their ways, try it out, see how it works. But it's really about finding inspiration, understanding at the core principle of what they're doing. And they're calling to that spirit and they're saying, there's a place for you here to walk among us. Um, the and there's so many different ways that you can do that. I'll just say this one last thing. When I was asked to come talk to Google about storytelling, and they said, can you do a PowerPoint for us? And I was like, oh God, no, I can't do a PowerPoint for you. I'm so sorry, and I walked in. I knew that I was in for just a bit of a different environment that I'm used to being in, and so I brought 24 red rose stems. And when I walked in and I gave everyone, and it was all men, a rose. And all of a sudden I didn't realize that I was going to be in a scene of The Bachelor. Because that's what it looked like when I looked out. I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. And I asked them to smell the rose before they told me what they were here for. And what was I doing? But I was bringing them into relationship with themselves and into their senses and bringing them out of this environment that they knew so well. So again, what's your way of creating a Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore moment? Another story I'll just tell you briefly about that. And again, it's not so much about your brain thinking and figuring it out because you're so smart, because you are all so smart. It's about how do you listen to the story itself to inspire you? I once did an event right after an election of a certain president, and a lot of the people that I hang out with were very upset and were very shaken. And so I thought I'm going to do a little story gathering. We're gonna come together, and I'm going to tell this kind of mythic story about the bigger mythos of what's happening. And the story, I used to drop rose petals around, and I would tell stories in circles and drop rose petals because there was something about inviting that beauty into the room. But this one, it said, give them grapes. And I'm like, grapes? That's so weird. And they're like, yeah, start the story by giving everybody a grape. And I was like, I don't get it at all, but okay, I'm going to listen to you, story. And so I did it. And I realized what the brilliance in the story that was so beyond my own, which was that in this moment of so much fear that was in the room, there was no resisting the sweetness that was also present. So I say this as a humble servant to the world of story, and that they can surprise you with their genius when you allow yourself to listen and allow them to guide you. And you just need to have some good questions. That's one of those questions. It's like, how am I going to set the stage? How am I going to create a space for people to catch the story? We talked about this at the very beginning. Know your intention. Just know why you're here. Know why you want to give. Look, you might say, when I tell stories, I love people. I always fall in love with people when I hear their stories. I always fall in love with people when I tell my stories. And so love is infused in every single story that I tell, whether or not I say the word or not. So I invite you, we did this, as I came in, to really kind of get really clear, because the clearer you are about your intention, and the more that you understand it, the more it just can't help but fill the space around you. I talked a little bit about this before, but I say learn how to play jazz. And that means be radically present with everything that happens in the room. Look, if there's a siren that's going by, or there are dogs that are barking really loudly outside, you got to find a way to work it into your story. Because everyone else is trying to really hard kind of ignore it with you, and it's creating such a discord. And when you just weave it on in, it relaxes everybody, and you're like, yeah, that helicopter up there is really loud. And you just somehow find a way to cleverly just mention it, and now we're all there and we're all together again. So again, like, how present can you be with what's happening? Because that means that you're alive with them. And the last thing is, I would say, know your medicine. Know your medicine. Know that superpower that only you can give. know what your gift is. Because that in itself, that knowing what your gift is and knowing your medicine, which means that you've got to have done some work to be able to do that. And then doing all the work that it takes to be on the stage and be willing to be seen and know that you are so valuable and what you have is so valuable that it is worth being shared. When you've done all of that, it is the most generous thing that you could possibly do because you're infusing the room with that so other people get to feel what it feels like and know that part of themselves as well. It is an unexplainable piece of the most magical aspect of sacred storytelling. So every piece of work that you've done in your life is a giveaway when you're coming in with the spirit of that. Um, so, oh gosh, I'm seeing a couple questions. That is that was the class for today. For those of you who feel complete, I will wish you well. And for those of you who kind of caught the bug of sacred storytelling and want to know about some online story ceremonies that are coming up and some online courses, you can stick around and I'll share some delights and goodies with you. And I'll also stay on for any extra questions if people have them. So thank you for being here today. Are there any questions before I continue on? Thoughts, geniuses. Barbara's saying, can the truth in telling an old story be to speak of the transformation of self through the story you're sharing? I'm like having to think about that a little bit.
I can make it easier.
Good to see you. Yes.
I work with indigenous people in the most remote areas of the world. They don't have electricity, they're hunter-gatherers. So I then come back with stories, their stories, and I don't want to try to tell their story. So how I was asking whether my gut is that it's in integrity to be able to just talk about my experience with their story.
Yeah.
Or is that diluting the story?
Well, this is a beautiful consideration, and what a beautiful way you get to live in the world. That sounds amazing. I think that what I understand is like, how do we stand in integrity is honoring the origin of the story and honoring the people who are creating it. So one of the things is you can simply ask them when they offer you the stories, can I share this?
Mm-hmm.
And if they give you your blessing, then it's that. It will change coming through you because you're not speaking it in their language. You're not speaking it in the language of the land where it comes from. But there's something, if you're carrying it, it's because something caught and is resonant with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember when I was in Ecuador recently, I met a fellow and he told me a bunch of their family stories. And I could understand 3/4 of the story, but I understood that there was a quarter of the story that I simply couldn't get at because I wasn't from that culture. It was wild and wonderful and weird and great. And it meant nothing to me, And so I think that we can, but that doesn't mean that the person that's listening to it won't receive something from it. So I think it's really as simple as honoring the name of the person that gave it to you, honoring the land that it came from, and like, wow, that story gets to walk over here now, or where you are now, because you were willing to keep giving it life. And so many of those old stories are disappearing because their carriers are going and they're not being carried. So I think it's a great thing to keep sharing these stories.
Thank you. And just to be clear, I do it with pure intention to raise money for their cultural preservation.
I don't even needed to ask me, but it's like, yeah, again, it's like, look, if a story doesn't want to be told through you, the spirit won't be there. It's like, it won't, so yeah. But I think, but these are really important questions, and we've seen so many people that don't trust how their stories are going to be carried, and so, or where they're not honored. And so I think when we honor them, we're also reminding others how to do that. If there are any other questions, I'll give you guys a little tour of what's coming up. Any other questions before I share my screen? Okay, I'm going to share my screen and show you some things. So this is from, what I'll do is I'm going to drop this. Oh, I should have done that before. I didn't do it. This is the link to our lovely class. This is our upcoming class page. So you might want to grab that link because most of our emails these days don't always make it into the inboxes. So this is the big course that's coming up in the first week of September. This is Unity. So the way that this school is based is that it goes through all different, every single chakra. And I taught this program for 4 years, and I was teaching all the story modalities. And still, after 9 months, I was seeing that a fair amount of people weren't having those breakthroughs where they felt fully confident as storytellers. And I really had to ask myself the hard question: what am I not offering to them? Where at the end of a full program, they don't still feel like they're fruiting and fully actualized and competent and confident. And I came to that you can't get around. If there are blocks in the energetic system, then you can't get to that channel of pure creativity and pure creative life force. And it's being in that I really believe where all the confidence comes from. And so I ended up developing this entirely different program that goes through all the different chakras of the body. So now we have 6-week modules that are designed to go through the chakras, and then we have 4-week modules that are where you actually learn how to tell a specific type of story. So this is one of those chakra classes. We're going into the heart, and we're looking at love, but all like the big love, the relationship love, the love of self, the love of other, the love of land, intimacy, what's between you and it. But here's what I love about, we bring in these guest teachers, and they're not your normal thing. They're not maybe what you would expect for a class on love. It says we're expanding all the, I always think of it like a spider's web, where our teachers kind of open up these different channels of thought, and then together we wind them all together, and it becomes this great web of conversation around love and how we're living through it. Kelsey Barrett is actually going to bring us a class called Crossroads of the Heart and the Mystery of the Rose, and she's an herbalist. She's an amazing herbalist. We're going to be working with Rose, and so what is it to work and engage and create a relationship with plants as allies to your experience and expression of love. We're going to be working with Polkanix, and she's going to be doing ancestor work and how to connect with your ancestors. We're going to be also guided by Stephen Jenkinson. We'll talk about matrimony, the bone house of love. And Stephen is an elder and one of my teachers, and someone who is, God, the way that he is exquisite is a word that comes to mind when I think of how he holds language and story. So when we're looking at this course, we're looking at, again, we're looking at Unity, Love, and Relationships. It's a 6-week class. We meet every Tuesday from 11 to 1 Pacific Standard Time, and then on Thursdays are when our guest teachers are. And what we're doing is we're diving into your inner world, and we're looking at what are the different, we talked about the spirits of stories, and what are all the different spirits of stories that are living in your system, maybe known or unknown, that are asking to be alchemized, that are asking to be transformed or healed. And we do all that through this really wild and crazy fun process of creativity and storytelling. So we're not going to, I don't do work that I would say, like, while this work can be considered therapeutic, it's not therapy. We're not going to go hang out with your inner child. We are going to really work with that energy that might be stuck and in the way of you getting full access to your life force. In this case, getting full access to your heart. So that's where we're going to be playing. That's that. The early bird special is on until Sunday. You get to save a whopping $100. So it's a good deal if you know that you want to do this course, to register sooner than later. And after this class, we take a 2-week break and to integrate all the things. When we come back, and you'll get to learn how to tell a teaching story. A teaching story, it's almost a lost art, these teaching stories. I once got to hear this fellow talk about, it was at Pioneers, it was at the Indigenous tent. I wish I could remember this man's name. And he said, you know, we've almost lost our teaching stories. And I was raising my children and I realized I didn't have them. I wasn't calling on them. And now that I have them, they're like my nannies. I don't have to tell the kids to be good or bad. I have these stories and I can ask them what characters they're playing in the story. And so it's coming into an old world way of being in relationship and in communication and having a shared story with, yes, with children, but also with all different kinds of people. It's a very specific kind of story where we're coming in with a value and a moral. We want to make sure that we get that we can communicate without being like this person. You let the story do the work. It's a really cool thing. So that is teaching stories. And again, when you register for them both, you get a good deal. So this, I'll let you go through this if this is calling to you. It's more information in there and blah 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 blah. Um, Let me show you something else that's coming up. Um, in September 10th, I'm doing a 1 day. It's actually a 3 hour story ceremony. We have three extraordinary musicians. I'm partnering with this woman named Wendy Hines, who's a somatic practitioner, and we're going to take a deep dive into the story of the love maker. And this is a one woman's heroine's journey to go meet the maker of love and everything that she meets along the way. Maker of love, spoiler alert, is an old woman that lives in a cave. And so, if you want to learn how to work with a story as a modality to help an audience learn how to lead a workshop where the story really leads you into an interpersonal expression, where it's like part workshop, part story. You hear a chapter, you get to hear music and performance, and then you also get to do one-on-one work with other people about how the story is being lived through you. So we're going to do it both online. So you'll get to partner up with people in your own rooms online. And then we're also doing it in person in Topanga Canyon. On the September 20th, we're doing a story jam. This is where anyone who wants to can come together, and it's an open house for us just to hang together and get to listen to story, poetry, song. It's just a feel good, fun event. It's for free, and come on, come one, come all. It's a great place for our alumni to come together and tell their stories that they've been working on, and for new people to come and see what we're all about and tell stories too. And because September's a little bit weird, every month we do a rhythm and story council, and that's a live event in. I don't think that I heard anyone from LA, so I'm going to keep going because that's just LA event. There's one other thing. Oh, there's the Hour of the Wolf. I'm just going to speak about that, which is this is online and it's a monthly event, and I do a practice of it's called a mystic form of storytelling called Soul Stories, where I read the field and a story is divined in our moment, and we then break down how it's living through us. So it's a really small, fun, connected way of being together. The other thing I'm going to tell you about, and then I'll stop talking, is that we have a few open spaces on our facilitator training program that begins in September. And I don't know, since you're here, Linda, do you want to just say a word about the facilitator training program? Not to put you on the spot, but
Sure. Sure.
your experience
Um,
with this?
well, yeah, it's about helping, it's about guiding. It's helping guiding the people
Well,
who
just
are,
you can just tell your experience in it, and then I'll describe it.
oh,
And
oh, you
then
describe it. Okay. My experience of it is that I'm getting more and more free with it. um, it's learning to help people sort out. No, for me is learning to help people sort out is expressing myself. I gave a presentation where I actually shared something quite deep that was personal to myself. So we're going to work on another one. We'll be working with another person, so that will be a coordinated facilitation, and then we're going to get lots of practice because I will listen in on all of these programs, I suppose, and be able to help people navigate through those classes.
so thank you, thank you, thank you. The facilitator program, it's a new program in the school, and what it is it's giving people, it's like the evolution of the school itself, where now we're going to have trained facilitators who will be working alongside us in the classes. And it gives you, it's both designed for people who just want to develop their facilitation skills. So if you're really wanting to look at your communication, your leadership, your confidence, your competence, it's a place where you get to bring and practice what it is that you're leading, and it's a place where you're going to get a lot of feedback and a lot of support and a lot of guidance. In a lot of our classes, if you've been in there before, when we come into a creative class, it's really like, come figure out what your voice is. It's just like love, 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 love. And in this class, it's an advanced class, so there is critique. There is like, we really want to help you get to be your absolute best. And these are people who have said, yes, I want to be in a leadership role in my life, and I want to figure out where are my blind spots. How can I get better? And this class really supports you on that. So perhaps you're someone that's just, hey, I want to up my capacity for facilitation, but also perhaps you're like, wait a second, this whole thing of like facilitating story circles, this is something that I really want to do in my life. It's going to become a job opening in our school, where we're going to be having more and more opportunities for our guest facilitators to actual lead facilitation circles, where it's a different structure, where I won't be live as much anymore coming after middle of next year. So it's a really great opportunity, and we just opened it up for a few more people, and we begin in September. So if you are curious about that, email info@lealam, and we can talk more about what that would look like. And then the last thing I would say is, if live classes aren't your thing, that's okay, because we also have this opportunity to come into Mighty Networks. I always forget to talk about this. We have a really amazing community platform that has, over 40 hours of guest teachers. I showed you those amazing guest teachers that are in this living library, and we're always having new guest teachers come in. So maybe you're one of those people that you're like, well, I don't want the class, but wow, the guest teacher series, I want to keep doing that. We have a thing where for $33 a month, you can come in and you get access to our whole community, which is a free writing class every month, a book reading club, which is going to start back up in September, there's something else. Oh, the story jams that happen, and this amazing resources of where you've got two new community managers who are coming in, so you'll be getting fed like the latest contests for writing and for novel writing and for grants and things like that. So it's going to be a really beautiful, rich piece of to gain resource, but also community that holds this way of being in connection, which is in a storied way. So I'll leave a link there, but you can also learn more about how to either do the $33 a month joining, or you can actually just have a complete study on your own modules, where you can do everything on your own. Whew, that's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
Are there any questions? Can I answer anything before we bid our adieus? Vanessa, I see Vanessa had a question, but I don't see her on here, so I can answer that. I'll just answer it. She had a question of, are there more upcoming classes? And yes, we do have more classes. You can look at that upcoming classes page and you'll see everything that's there. All right, let's take ourselves off mute and say farewell. Have a lovely day. Barbara, it was great to see you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to get on your website and do some exploring.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Mahalo nui loa.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.